Welcome to the Turkey Hunter Podcast with me, your host, Andy Galliano. In this podcast, I share with turkey hunters just like you how to have more turkeys on your hunting property and how to have more successful turkey hunts. I teach you how to do this with tips and interviews with turkey hunting pros, wildlife management tips, and entertaining turkey hunting stories. Tune in weekly as I share proven and simple strategies to help you have more success this turkey season. Make sure to head over to www.iamturkeyhunting.com to subscribe to receive free turkey hunting tips, tactics, strategies, and product reviews. Also, please visit and like my Facebook fan page. Go to Facebook and search I Am Turkey Hunting, and also feel free to post your turkey hunting photos from this past season and let us know where and when you killed your bird. For all of you Twitter users out there, please follow me on Twitter, where my handle is @TurkeyHitman, and I will be sure to follow you back. And now, for this week's show. Hello and welcome back to this week's episode of the Turkey Hunter Podcast. You are listening to episode 96, The Science Behind Setting Turkey Hunting Seasons and Bag Limits. And I am your host and the guy who is currently in the market for a youth model 20-gauge turkey shotgun. If you listen to the show often, you've heard me say that I am one of these days going to buy a 20 gauge and get it rigged up for turkey hunting, and I've decided to go ahead and start looking around for one. I'll tell you a funny story real quick. I actually went to a local gun store yesterday, and they had a used Remington 870 in 20 gauge, and it was a youth model gun. Had a ported barrel. It only had one choke with it, and the gun was in pretty good shape. They are asking $329 for the gun, so I asked the salesman if he could do any better on the price, and he told me that they would sell it to me for $309. Well, I didn't feel like it was as great a deal as I wanted to get, so I told him that I would think about it. Because actually, even though porting a barrel cost about $100, it's not something that is all that important turkey hunting. So, to me, it offers no value to the gun. So yesterday, after I get home, I open up a flyer that I received in the mail this week from one of the large big box sporting goods stores. And after rebate, they have a brand new Remington 870 youth model 20 gauge for $249.99. So I may end up with a new shotgun here very soon, which will be kind of cool to take that one to the range and get it patterned, shoot some different turkey loads in it, and just see what that little 20 gauge with the short barrel can do with some different chokes in it. So I'm pretty pumped up about that. And I guess the other good news is that today I have 202 days, 8 hours, 4 minutes, and 55 seconds to get that little 20 gauge dialed in and ready and roaring to go for opening day of spring turkey season in Alabama. So I've got a pretty cool show for you today. Several weeks ago, Bob Smith from Pennsylvania, who is one of the faithful listeners to the show, he's a big fan of the show, and I'm very thankful to Bob for his support of the show. Well, he emailed me with a show topic suggestion that I thought was a really good one. Bob recommended that I get a biologist from a state game and fish department on for an interview to chat about why the fall seasons and bag limits in many states are getting cut back. Ultimately, we all know why the seasons and bag limits are getting cut, and that is because of a declining population. And now I'm assuming politics are not involved, and it's science only. But Bob more specifically wanted to know how the policymakers decide how long our season should be and what our bag limit should be, given the fact that our populations are declining in many areas. Well, since Bob is from Pennsylvania, he made the suggestion that I get in touch with the Pennsylvania State Wild Turkey Biologist. And I made several attempts to get the biologist with Pennsylvania on the phone to do an interview, but I didn't have any luck. So after trying for several days over the course of several weeks, I made the decision to bail on Pennsylvania and try to find someone in another state to do an interview. Well, I've got a lot of listeners in Pennsylvania, so I hated the thought of bailing on getting a biologist from Pennsylvania, but I also have a lot of listeners in the state of New York. And not only do I have a lot of listeners in New York, but many parts of New York have also experienced turkey population declines, and they are experiencing shortened seasons and lowered bag limits as well. I reached out to the New York Department of Environmental Conservation and was able to get Lori Severino on the phone. And Lori recommended that I speak to Mike Schiavone, who is their small game biologist in New York. She made that recommendation because she said Mike's the expert on the topic about setting seasons and bag limits, and that he would be a great person to have on the show. Well, she didn't lie. Mike definitely delivered. So today I'm presenting the interview with Mike Schiavone, and Lori Severino is on the line, even though she's awfully quiet during the interview because she wanted Mike to handle the interview, but she wanted to listen in, which of course I'm perfectly fine with. And both Lori and Mike are with the New York Department of Environmental Conservation, and they're here to talk about the science that goes into setting turkey hunting seasons and bag limits. So let's jump right into the interview, and I will see you guys on the other side. Hey everybody, thanks a lot for tuning in this week. I'm excited to tell you that I have on the line with me Mike Schiavone and Lori Severino from the New York Department of Environmental Conservation. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you got
Perfect. The New York DEC. And I wanted to get Mike on the phone with us to really kind of help shed some light on what goes into setting seasons for the animals that we hunt, but primarily turkeys, since this is the Turkey Hunter podcast. So, Mike, how are you and where are you?
I'm well, thanks. I'm in our Albany office, which is our headquarters office for DEC.
Fantastic. All right. And are you a turkey hunter yourself?
I am a turkey hunter. I've been, turkey hunting since I was probably 14, and I've enjoyed it my whole life. I've been the small game unit leader now for a few years, but I've been working on turkeys for about 10.
Okay. Awesome. Well, tell us just very briefly about yourself and how you got into turkey hunting. You said you've been turkey hunting for a long time, so how'd you get introduced to it?
Well, it's a pretty traditional story. Probably a lot of your listeners tell the same story, where my dad and relatives. I actually grew up down near New York City, but I was fortunate that my father and my relatives had a place in upstate New York where they would go hunting and fishing, and they took me from the time I was very young, and so I got hooked right away, and that actually led me to get into the field that I'm in as a wildlife biologist. So,
awesome.
And if you talk to a lot of people in our field, I think they tell you a similar story.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I wanted to get you on the phone to shed a little light about how seasons are set, because it's not just New York, but many states around the country are experiencing declines in wild turkey populations, and it's up to the Mikes of the world to help us to manage that population so that we'll have birds to hunt in the future. And so I want to thank you for what you do, because it's pretty much a thankless job for that, for the most part. But without you guys, we wouldn't have the resources that we have. And so, I do appreciate that. But can you give us kind of a detailed breakdown of all of the factors that I guess you can speak more specifically about New York, but tell us some of the factors, or all of the factors at New York that you guys look into to determine your season dates and the length of the season as well.
All right, so, we have two seasons in New York. We have a spring season and fall season like most states do now. Really, the biggest changes that we've made in response to declines in turkey abundance and kind of changing environmental factors are changes to our fall season. Because in New York, our fall season is either sex. You can take a hen, or you could take a gobbler or Jake. So particularly, since hen mortality and survival is really what's driving turkey populations, we want to be particularly careful in setting that fall season. And so for a long time, when turkey populations were kind of booming in New York through the 90s and the early 2000s, we could be pretty liberal with our seasons, and there was a lot of other environmental factors that were going on that allowed that population to expand pretty rapidly and to grow. And our seasons were liberalized accordingly. And over the past 15, 20 years, a lot of those factors have changed, and so we're down on the downward side of that population growth curve now. And habitat has changed in predator populations and those types of things. So the factors that we used when we set seasons 15 years ago were relatively simplistic in some way, and now they're a little more elaborate because we recognize that the system that turkeys exist in, both the biological system, habitat and predators and that type of thing, and also the social system, what hunters and other New Yorkers want from the wild turkey resource, that has changed as well. And so we try to incorporate all that suite of factors in a more comprehensive manner. And so it's a complex process. I can get into it in more detail about specifically what we did to change the fall season if you're interested.
Yes, absolutely.
So basically, and if folks are interested, there's a lot of this information is also available on our website. But in a nutshell, there's a three big step process. And so the first thing that we did is we worked with researchers he used to be at SUNY ESF. His name is Bill Porter, and if any of your folks are interested in kind of what we know about turkeys, Dr. Porter laid the foundation for a lot of what we know about turkeys, particularly in the Northeast. He's since moved to Michigan State, but he was at SUNY Environmental Science and Forestry in Syracuse for a long time. So we worked with him and one of his graduate students to really understand what the landscape potential is for turkeys, how good different parts of New York are at producing turkeys. And what really drives that, what we found out, was that it's a combination of habitat, large landscape scale habitat and weather. And so based on that, we figured out that New York State can be broken up into three kind of major zones based on that interaction of habitat and weather. Because when you have, rainy, wet springs and you have predominantly forested habitat, you're going to have fewer turkeys in the landscape. If you have a good mix of habitat types, if you have a good mix of forest and agriculture and old fields and things like that, and you have less spring rain, you're going to have more turkeys. And so we really, we had decades of data on habitat and weather that we could look at and see how that's changed over time and really figure out what the harvest potential was for different parts of the state. So that was really the first big step in understanding how to set seasons, what the spatial scale is what we call it.
Yeah.
So the next big piece then after that was really figuring out, okay, so based on those three big zones that are similar in their turkey production potential, what should the season be? And so for that, we engage in this process called structured decision making, and it's been around for decades, but it's really just a way to break down a complex problem into its component parts. And so it allows us to look at some biological objectives like maximizing turkey populations and also incorporating social objectives. So things, basically what a hunter's value, what do they want from a fall hunting experience, what's a high quality fall hunting experience for them. And then and so we can look at different season structures, whether we have a liberal season, like a 7-week season, or a very conservative season, like a 2-week season, and we can look at a population model. So if we, under these different scenarios, we can expect certain population growth rates based on data that we have. We can expect certain survival rates based on data we have. We can expect certain harvest, number of birds killed by hunters. And so under those alternatives, how does it vary across the state? And how does that affect hunter satisfaction? How does that affect turkey numbers? And so that's really how we identify what's the optimal season structure that balances turkey numbers and hunter satisfaction for those big geographic regions in New York.
Okay.
I know that's a lot, but it is a complex process, and like I said, folks can actually read through how we went through that process in more detail.
Yeah, well, it is a lot, but there is so much that goes into it, just like you said, and so it's good that all of those things are being looked at. And me as a turkey hunter, when I first started turkey hunting and was just hunting here in Alabama, where I'm from, all I wanted to do was hunt turkeys, kill 5 turkeys a year, which still is the bag limit. It was then and still is now. And now that I have been able to travel around the country and hunt different states, and I realize that the hunting is better in a lot of other states where the animal is managed a lot better, I look at it and I say, okay, well, I'm not as interested in killing 5 turkeys and having to go out and just absolutely wear myself to the bone to kill 5. I'm a lot more interested in maybe if I just killed 3, but had a lot better experience while I was out hunting, heard more turkeys, encountered more turkeys, matched wits with more turkeys. And so, maybe a lot of that's got to do with me getting older, but I think a lot of it has to do with seeing what turkey hunting is like in some of these other states where the resource is really managed very well. And so I think that the fact that you guys take that into account in making your season length and setting those season dates really says a lot. I think that's awesome.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And one of the, like I said, when we're going through that fall season setting process, that's really what that structured decision-making process is all about, is really balancing, like I said, those competing objectives. So maximizing turkey numbers, but also maximizing hunter satisfaction. And so we use that term maximizing, but you can't maximize both at once, right? So we could have a very liberal season with a high bag limit, and hunters would be satisfied for a while, but turkey population would suffer. The converse being, we could close the fall season, and it would help turkey populations. The hunting mortality would be 0, but then hunters would be dissatisfied. And so we have to find what the balance is. And what we're really fortunate in New York is that we work really closely with Cornell University, has a group called the Human Dimensions Research Unit, and they really specialize in the social science of natural resource management. And so as part of that SDM process, they surveyed over 6,000 fall turkey hunters in New York. And we just didn't ask them to vote, what kind of fall season do you want? Do you want a 7-week season or a 2-week season? What we really tried to get at was what they value from a high-quality fall hunting experience, and what trade-offs are they willing to make. And so, the trade-offs between having the chance to go afield and also having a lot of turkeys on the ground. And so what we found, what they ranked highest, more than you would think it would just be, they just want to go kill a bird. But what they ranked highest above all the others was hearing and seeing birds. That's what they really wanted to, which is directly tied to turkey abundance. And then the second thing they valued was just the chance to go afield. They just wanted a chance to actually go out in the woods and be able to hunt. And then the third thing was the chance to kill a bird. So, their priorities were very similar to our priorities, which is, making sure that there's enough turkeys out there for everybody to enjoy.
Right. It's very important. So are those then the factors that you talked about that you guys looked at to set your season dates and season length? Is that pretty much the same for setting a bag limit as well?
Yeah, we looked at a suite of season alternatives, and those season alternatives for the fall were a combination of season length and bag limit. And we have really good data in New York on, the number of birds hunters take, their success rate on one for the first bird, and areas that have a 2-bird bag limit, the success rate on the second bird. So we have a really good data that we can feed into a population model. And so what we did is we said, okay, starting from right now, over the next 5 years, under these different harvest scenarios, whether it be a 7-week 2-bird bag, what will happen? What will the population trajectory be over the next 5 years? And then we said, okay, under a 3-week 2-bird bag or a 2-week 1-bird bag, and so we can compare those different alternatives against each other and see which one does the best job at protecting the turkey resource, but also meeting hunter satisfaction objectives. And so it was a combination of season length and bag limit that we're looking at, not just one or the other. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I would definitely imagine those two would go hand in hand. So was there any consideration for maybe even moving the fall season or changing, I shouldn't say moving, but changing the fall season to male turkeys only?
There was. That was one of the alternatives we had considered. We didn't wind up ranking that during that structured process. And the reason why is because we collect age and sex information on birds in the fall. And one of the things that we do is we ask hunters to identify their bird, and then we compare it to our identification of the bird. And so hunters sometimes are challenged to identify male turkey, especially young male turkeys in the fall.
Right.
And so that was one issue of misidentification, especially for jakes, during the fall season, young of the year birds. The other issue is that if we just made it gobblers, so adult males or toms, only about 20% of our fall take, or 20 to 22% of our fall take is toms. And so if we just made it toms, that would actually restrict fall hunting opportunity a lot more than just changing season length or bag limit, because they, it makes up a relatively small percent of our fall take.
Okay. What percentage of your fall take are hens?
It's been about 50-50, and over the past 5, 6, 7 years, that was one thing we were concerned about, is that we noticed that the percentage of our fall take, especially of our adult hen take, was starting to creep up. And so, and fall hunting mortality, particularly of hens, was something we were concerned about. And, we were in the middle of we're almost towards the end of a 4-year study where we're looking at hen harvest and survival. We're banding hens during the winter, and we're tracking them with satellite radios and to look at hen harvest and survival, because one of the concerns we had based on the proportion of adult hens we were getting in the fall harvest was that our harvest rates were too high in the fall.
Okay. All right. Now, you guys have in New York, you have a rich history of fall turkey hunting, and I know it's very important to a lot of people, and it's the same way with next door to you in Pennsylvania and a lot of the northeastern states, even more so than down here in the southeast. So I think that you probably have a lot more pressure on your birds in the northeast than what other parts of the country do in the fall, where deer hunting is, our deer season in Alabama lasts, it seems like 4 months, but I really think it's about 3.5 months. And that's what 90% of the population of hunters do in the state is hunt deer. And other animals, squirrels, quail, any of the other animals really don't get hunted all that much, and the people who are hunting those get pushed out of the woods because of all the deer hunters. So I know it's really important for you guys to, manage that resource in a manner that you are giving people the opportunity to get out there and take birds. So that makes sense on not just going to a male-only fall season. You talked a little bit about the population decline in New York. What are the main contributing factors for that from your studies?
So there's a couple of things that are going on. One is, as I mentioned before, turkey restoration occurred in New York from the 1950s through the early 1990s, where we captured wild birds and moved them around the state. And some of what used to be the conservation departments, now DEC in New York, folks that did that, Fred Evans and folks like that, were some of the pioneers in those methods of taking wild birds and moving them around. And then, those techniques have been used all over the country successfully. So in the 1990s, after restoration was completed, so birds were introduced to these habitats that were vacant largely. And so the population just really took off. And at the same time, the landscape habitat was better, and so we had that good mix of habitats I talked about before, with the mix of forest and agriculture and those old fields, those early successional habitats. We also had this situation where we had raccoon rabies come through in New York in the early 90s, and so those nest predators like raccoons, skunks, possums were really knocked down by that raccoon rabies epidemic. And so that was just a factor that would normally suppress turkey nest success, and that was being suppressed by rabies. And so you had this perfect storm of conditions that allowed turkeys to really boom through around 2001 or so. And then from 2001 until 2005 or so, we saw this population decline. And what we thought initially, and I think it was the case, was it was just a natural contraction. Turkeys had to settle back down to be in line with local environmental conditions and that type of thing. It couldn't go on increasing forever, right? But then what we noticed over the last decade or more is that the decline has continued, and that in the past, since about 2008 or so, has been really a sharper decline. And so what we think is going on is a couple of kind of large scale and then also smaller scale things. One is that landscape scale habitat has changed. And so in areas in New York that used to have, especially like western New York, near Buffalo that way, we used to have this good mix of habitats. Now it's mostly mature forest. And so you'll get turkeys there, and turkeys will persist there, but just be at lower densities than they would in other parts of the state, say where I am in the kind of the eastern central part of the state, where we have a better mix of habitat types. Turkeys really, especially for nesting and brood rearing, they need those open fields and they need that shrubby cover and that type of thing. And so when you lose that, your nest success and poult success is going to be lower. We also, that rabies that came through in the 90s it's still present, but it's at a much lower level now. And so populations for a lot of those nest predators have rebounded. We have predators like fisher and bobcat, which didn't used to be in central and western New York, but they've moved into parts of central and western New York now. Right. A lot of the avian predators, hawks and owls and things like that their numbers are doing well, are doing better than they had been 20 years ago. So you have a lot of factors working against turkeys right now. And then, so you have habitat, you have predators, and then over the past 6 or 7 years, we just have back-to-back poor production years. And so when we've had these rainy, wet May and June periods, and so that's really when turkeys in New York are either nesting or raising poults. And so when we have really wet May and June, either nest success or poult success or both will suffer. And so when you get that back-to-back years, which we had for the past 6 years or something like that, we had below average productivity. The population just doesn't get a chance to bounce back. And so it was, that kind of suppressed the population even further. And then, when we throw in 3 of the last 6 winters have been severe winters. And so fortunately this past winter was mild, but the previous 2 winters before that in New York were very severe. And so when you get extended periods with deep snow and below freezing temperatures, which we had in 14 and 15, that can really affect survival, particularly of juvenile birds. And so you have all of these things going on at the same time. And so it's within this context that we have to set seasons. And so really, understanding what the habitat is, what the weather is, what the predator populations are, all those things, and also what the hunting pressure is, you got to be able to come up with a way to try to put your hand around all those things in order to set a sustainable season.
Yeah. So we know the past couple of years were bad. How was this past spring as far as hatch and recruitment?
For 2016?
For 2016, yeah. Is there hope for the future?
Well, it's funny that we had a good production year in 2014, and then we had a really severe winter. And so I think the ground that we gained was offset by that tough winter. Last summer, the production was close to average. It wasn't terrible. We had a mild winter, so that those two things coinciding is good. So I think if you look at our, some of the data that we have, we're showing a little bit of a recovery here over the past year or so. This year, we do a summer turkey survey during the month of August, and so it's both DEC staff and the public can submit observations of birds that they see as they're out and about during the month of August, and they can actually submit them through our website online. And that really allows us to look at an index, poults per hen, the average number of poults per adult hen. And so we don't know what it's going to be yet. We're still gathering data, but just based on the weather that we had a kind of a cold, wet first week of May, which was bad news. But the rest of May and June was kind of dry and warm, which is good. So from what I'm seeing so far, I think the production year it'll be decent, and there'll be pockets, of course. New York's a large place, so there'll be pockets where production wasn't so great. But in general, sure. My fingers are crossed that the dry weather we had in most of May and June is a good omen for a good production year in 2016. Yeah,
I hope so too. So what can we hunters do to help out our state biologists and game and fish departments? I mean, are there volunteer programs that we can participate in to help you guys do what you do and to help manage our resources well?
Absolutely, yeah. So one of the simplest things folks can do is make sure that you report your harvest in the spring and the fall. And so those harvest data are really important to state agencies in their decision making, and to make sure that we have accurate information about the number of birds being taken by hunters. And if departments have like hunter surveys about how much time you spend to field, hunter effort, and that type of thing, fill those out and send them back. And like I said, that partnership between the agency and the hunting community is really important to make good management decisions. There's also lots of what we call citizen science efforts, and so our August turkey survey is an example of that. And so if your agency in your state has a citizen science effort, whether it's a winter turkey survey or summer turkey survey or whatever the case may be, make sure you participate in that, and you let other folks know that opportunity is available. And it's been, even for the non-hunting community, people love participating in those types of surveys where they can report observations of whether it be turkeys or deer or whatever wildlife are out there.
Yeah, awesome. I appreciate that information. Do you have any closing thoughts or comments that you want to share with us before we call it a day?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I just encourage folks to learn more about habitat management efforts that are, either ongoing or that they can participate in. New York is a big state, but only about 15% of our land is publicly held. So, habitat is really important for nesting and brood rearing. We only have access, the state agency only has access to a small percentage of the landscape. So if folks are interested in either they have access to land or they're part of a hunt club or their family has land where they can do habitat management, then work with groups like Turkey Federation or Rough Grouse Society or your state agency about getting technical advice about how do they develop a habitat management plan, how can they cut timber, how do you cut timber in a sustainable way that has wildlife benefits and that type of thing. Really, look into ways that you can do some habitat management work on land that you have access to, and it's going to improve your hunting, but it's also going to just be good for wildlife in general.
And that's really where it all starts, isn't it? And if we
Absolutely.
don't have the right land, we're not going to have whatever it is we want there, whether it's deer or turkeys or grouse or pheasants or whatever it happens to be. So obviously there's got to be a population in the area, but if you can manage your property and make it better than your neighbors, you're going to have more of those animals you're managing for than your neighbors. So yeah, I think that's very wise advice. So Mike, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to come on and shed some light, not just on New York State, but I think a lot of the states that are having their seasons cut back and bag limits cut back, and a lot of our listeners in those states can take the information that you've provided and be able to say, okay, well, this is going to be fairly universal. There are states out there that are not looking at it as in depth or not as aggressive as maybe New York State is in managing that resource. But for the most part, most states are managing their resources very well. And so I appreciate you shedding light on that. And Lori, you have been extremely quiet, and I don't want people to think that I've just left you out intentionally.
No. Mike is the one to talk on this. Is our guy on grouse. Is very helpful and knowledgeable on the topic.
Lori, we can barely hear you, but for you guys listening, Lori was kind enough to set all of this up for me to speak with Mike. And so, Lori, I greatly appreciate your help with that as well. And I wish you guys a very wonderful afternoon and hope that everything keeps going the right way for us turkey hunters and for the turkeys up that direction.
Great. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, and if everybody goes to field this fall, wish them good luck.
Thank you, Mike.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. Take care.
You guys have a great day.
Goodbye now.
Bye-bye.
Okay. I hope that you guys enjoyed that interview and learned a little something from that. For me, I think the thing that really stood out the most is that the Department of Environmental Conservation uses hunter satisfaction survey results as one of the factors in determining the length of the season and bag limits. They really seem to be listening to what you hunters in New York believe to be the most important aspect of enjoyment of your turkey hunting, and they're setting the season lengths and bag limits to try to appease the greatest number of hunters. And I'm pretty impressed with that. And I don't know if that's something that most states do or not. I would hope so, but I find the challenge of balancing satisfying the greatest number of hunters possible and managing an amazing natural resource like the wild turkey pretty dang interesting. Okay, so that's all that I have for you guys today. But before I sign off for the week, I'm going to ask you for one favor. If you found the show this week to be informative, then please forward, like, share, and retweet this week's episode on Twitter and Facebook for me. As always, you know that is extremely helpful in introducing potential new listeners to the show. Of course, once you introduce them to the show, it's up to me to provide really good content from that point to keep them coming back to the show. And I think that I'm still doing that for you guys because we're about to close out our best August ever as far as downloads to the show. And I'm very grateful for those of you who are helping to grow the show by letting those who follow you on social media know that this resource, the Turkey Hunter Podcast, is something that you listen to each week. Thank you guys very much for that, and thank you so much for tuning in this week. I know that you have choices. I appreciate you spending your time with us. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Goodbye. Thanks for tuning in. You were just listening to the Turkey Hunter Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please go on over to iTunes and leave a 5-star review. And make sure to head over to www.iamturkeyhunting.com to subscribe for free turkey hunting tips, tactics, strategies, and product reviews to help you have a more successful turkey season. And stay tuned for upcoming episodes on hunting afternoon birds, how to film your hunt, and the breeding cycle of hens, as well as some guest interviews. Thanks again for listening. We know your time is valuable, and we appreciate you sharing some of it with us. See you next week.